And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Two Guys and a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. My name is Don Preston, and so glad to be back with you again. And there's William Bell off to my east in Memphis, Tennessee. William, great to see you again.
All right, good to
And
see you as well, Don.
yeah, it's good to be back. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to be with you, and appreciate you filling in last week. Um, that little round with the dentist was just absolutely not fun.
It did not sound fun at all. I can
Yeah.
tell you that.
One of the last things you want to hear when you're sitting in a dentist chair, right? And they've told you they're going to have to extract a tooth. So the dentist has got a hold of it, and you hear this sound, crack, and the dentist kind of goes, whoops.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I know I had to have a wisdom tooth pulled, you know, by a dental surgeon at one time, and that was really tough, but it didn't break or anything, but just the fact that they had to do it, it was tough.
yeah. Well, what happened was one of the roots of this tooth, and the tooth itself had a vertical fracture in it. That's one of the and had started hurting like crazy.
Hmm.
So, it had to come out. They couldn't repair it. And so one of the roots didn't grow straight down. It grew down and then created a hook in the bone.
Hmm.
So it wasn't going to just lift straight out. So it busted, it broke, and the
You needed
dentist.
one of those special wrenches to get that.
But the dentist had to deaden the jaw twice. It was a female dentist, and I must say she's very, very good. I really appreciated her. Had a great sense of humor, uh, and that sometimes help you, when
Oh
you're.
yeah, yeah.
But nonetheless, she actually started in, and oh boy, yeah, it wasn't near close to dead, and so she had to give me more and had to wait and all this kind of stuff. But when the tooth finally came out, of course she showed it to me, and yeah, I was going to be, and I was in a world of pain,
Mhm.
and so she gave me prescription for 800 Tylenol, 800 Motrin, uh, none of the opioids, thankfully, which I don't know how to take any of those anyway. I'm just averse to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, I lived on the Motrin and the Tylenol for about 2.5 days. And, on Saturday, all of a sudden I was feeling pretty good.
Oh,
And
good.
yeah, glad to get that behind me. I can tell you now, I've just got to learn how to chew on that side because I've got an empty space where two different teeth were,
Yeah.
and that's
Uh,
that's tough to get used to. William, I've been going over what you presented last week on resurrection and the new creation, a comparison between 1 Corinthians 15 and Colossians. And I've really been intrigued by this. And I mean, it's one of those type of things that when you see it, it's automatically like, oh, wow, yeah.
yes.
Why haven't I seen this 30 years ago, 40 years ago? Uh, and obviously, some of the parallels I have seen, but you map them out in such a systematic manner that was just really powerful. And I know it may seem a little bit redundant for the audience, but I would like for you to develop this a little bit more tonight, and I want to weigh in at given spots. But I think this is worth repeating. This is a classic example of lots of times we may have this kind of almost a subliminal idea that, well, this book doesn't deal with eschatology all that much, or this book doesn't deal with resurrection all that much, or whatever. And so we divide it, delineate it from books that do deal more specifically and explicitly. with those topics. And then as our knowledge and understanding grows, all of a sudden we begin to see the correlations. And to go back to your history, which is a good example of me. And what I'm trying to express here is years and years and years ago, I never saw Galatians as a book overtly concerned with eschatology. Well, then I began to see patterns of thought concerning the Abrahamic inheritance, which is a subject that I've picked up on over the last couple of years in a brand new way, brand new focus, and what have you. But then you wrote a little book entitled Eschatology in the Book of Galatians. And that book just really, is one of those boom type of things. And I've encouraged you about 1,000,000 times to republish that book, and you still haven't done it.
You're so right.
Listen, folks, join with me in pressuring William Bell to republish his book, Eschatology in Galatians, and to add to it, to expand it, because now he's got an additional, 30 years, William, since you did that?
Wow, Don. That when was that? 1992, I think, is when I wrote that book. So
30 plus years.
yeah, yeah.
And you might have learned a thing or two since then.
Yeah, maybe one or two things.
Yeah. So, boy, I would dearly, dearly love for you to republish that book, to revise it, to expand it, and to republish it. I know that it would be a tremendous resource for those people out there who are wanting to dig deeper and who may be like I was years and years and years ago, who just don't quite understand how Galatians fits into the eschatological narrative.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the way I was before writing the book. It like hit me, I was given the assignment to do it, and I'm saying, where's the eschatology in Galatians?
What are you
And
trying to do to me here?
yeah. And then when after I got into it, man, I was totally fascinated. It's kind of like this study on Colossians, I didn't see it, and all of a sudden, something clicked. But I tell you, I'm even doing something else I haven't mentioned to you that I think is really even more powerful than the Colossian stuff. I've been reading from N.T. Wright in his book on resurrection
Of the Son of Man.
of the Son of God. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said some things in there that kind of triggered something. And I'm still working it out, but I think I've got a handle on it. I mean, it was really profound, and one part of it is the fact that we generally look at the term natural, and of course the futurists do particularly, as a reference to the body, the physical body. That's the way it's generally interpreted, so that it becomes a distinction between the physical body and a spiritual body, a corporeal versus a non-corporeal. However,
Yeah,
the word sukkikos wasn't used that way.
that's right.
And you didn't tell me that. It's not a comparison between
Physical
the physical and the spiritual. It's a comparison between something that was spiritual and something more spiritual.
Yeah.
And wow, when I got that, I said, and so now I interpret 1 Corinthians upside down.
Okay.
And you have to
you start at the end and work back.
Exactly. And man, I tell you what I found there and what I worked is really, to me, astounding. So
you and I have talked about this, and I know I've spoken about this on different programs, different venues, and what have you. Here we are, veterans of the movement. We both dedicated untold hours, amounts of time, and yet, to me, the thrill of learning, the thrill of digging deeper, the thrill of making more and more and more connections and seeing the incredible beauty, the incredible harmony of the entire biblical narrative instead of saying, oh, well, this book's about this and that book's about that.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not really the case at all. Even though there are 66 books, it's all in reality 66 chapters of one single book
Yes.
with a common thread, a common theme, and that's the restoration of the life that was lost in Adam. And sometimes because we have a tendency to delineate subjects based upon given specific words, terms, or phrases.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of unconsciously, subconsciously, sometimes some people are unconscious when they try to read the Bible, but nonetheless, it's almost like they were. Because this book doesn't mention those exact same words, terms, or phrases, and this one does. Well, they can't be talking about the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And increasingly over the years, it has dawned on me that creates such a journalistic straitjacket, if I may use that term, that says, okay, Paul, if you say these things over here, if you use these words, terms, and phrases here, then you've got to use those same identical words, terms, and phrases in every other epistle that you wrote. You can't expand, you can't modify. And by modify, I don't mean change the message, but I mean modify your terminology. You
Mm-hmm.
can't do that, Paul. And I've just grown more and more and more aware of how much of a fallacy, a hermeneutical fallacy, that is. And I think your study here of the comparison between 1 Corinthians 15 and Colossians chapter 1 is a really, really good example of that. Paul doesn't start out in the book of Colossians chapter 1, by saying, okay, I'm going to talk about resurrection now, like he does essentially, for all practical purposes' sake, in 1 Corinthians 15.
Right.
And so, once again, I'm guilty. I've never looked at Colossians in the very way that you have presented it in the outline, the PowerPoint presentation that you sent me, demonstrating that these incredible parallels, and they are verbal parallels, but they're not specific linguistic parallels.
Mm-hmm.
So again, while it may seem redundant for part of our audience that listened to you and watched you last week, I want to hear you. This is as much for Preston as it is for the audience, folks. I'll tell you that right now. I mean, I've got the PowerPoint right here on my desk in front of me. All right. And as I opened it up today and as I printed it off, I just sat here and I was just like, oh my goodness gracious. Holy cow. Yeah. Yeah. And it was just flowing in such a beautiful way. So I'm going to turn the mic back over to you, William. Let you develop this. I want to interject from time to time with comments, perhaps some questions along the way for further elucidation. But like I said, this is as much for Preston as it is for our audience who probably listened last week. So take us away or carry it away in sharing with us the parallelism between 1 Corinthians 15, Paul's magnum opus on the resurrection, and his epistle to the Colossians.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate you looking over it and seeing the correlations and seeing how it makes sense. At least, hearing that it makes sense to you helps a lot as I looked at it. And the people from, the audience who heard it also appreciated it. And last week I was kind of under the gun because I was just finishing up some parts and had to present it, even though I felt very confident about what I was seeing and had done most of the work mentally, but I hadn't put it on paper.
Right.
And so afterwards I got the opportunity to put it on the PowerPoint. But the overall premise is what we've always understood, and that is that, Christ died for sins, and that's the overall theme and motif of First Corinthians 15. So I went through initially just going through verses that pointed that out over and over again.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of times that people just don't, either they don't see, or they won't see because they are wanting to see something else in it. And so he starts out that way, he ends that way, and everything in between is still focused on that when you really get down to it. But as I was thinking about it, and when I got to the first fruit concept, then I looked at the firstborn in Colossians, and I said, wait a minute, you can't have, and all this started from the lesson I think I did on one seed, one resurrection.
Mm.
I don't know whether that was the title of what I did last week or not, because I've been really going through a lot of this lately. So it's all beginning to come together. But nevertheless, as a result of that, I'm saying, okay, you can't get two different natures, two different seeds from the one seed, or two different bodies from that. And that took me to Colossians, and I said, this has to be the same thing. And then I started going through the chapter, and I looked and I said, wait a minute, all of this stuff is pretty much identical, to it. And there are a couple of verses that we have to go out of the quote first chapter. But remember, this was an epistle, so it's just really one chapter, except for
Yeah.
the man-made chapter divisions in it. But at any rate, saying that, the first thing that I would correlate would be the fact that Paul, generally after the salutation of Colossians, he starts off with the gospel, just like he does in First Corinthians 15. So verses 1 and 2, I declare to you the gospel, which I've preached to you, etc. And everybody's familiar with that passage, at least we hope so. And then in Colossians 1:5, he talks about the gospel that had come to you and to all those who were in the world, the cosmos, etc. And so there's a correlation. And if he's talking about the gospel is for the um, putting away of sin. And so it's Christ's role as the high priest in doing away with sin. And that's the importance of his body. Most people are making the body the essence of what resurrection is all about, but it's the body that was offered for the sacrifice for sins. And so they're trying to use it as the objective of the text from the purpose of what our bodies would be like. But go ahead, you had something to say.
Yeah, I'd like to take a step back or two uh, to what you referred to there in Colossians chapter 1, because as you were going about over that with Christ being the first fruits there
Mm-hmm.
in 1 Corinthians 15, and he is the firstborn in Colossians chapter 1, verse 15 and following. Uh, the thing that struck me in the reference to Colossians chapter 1, verse 5 and 7, Paul says we're bound to give thanks to God always, but uh, how that you obeyed the gospel which was preached to you from the beginning, and it is bringing forth fruit in you as it is also in all the world. Several different scholars have pointed out, and this is what I was reflecting on as you went over it briefly there. Paul in Colossians 1 is reflecting back on the garden. Be fruitful and multiply. So Paul is talking about a new creation in Colossians chapter 1, 5 and following,
Yes.
with the gospel of Christ being the seed to bring forth this fruit. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Christ is the second Adam over the new creation. And so there, I don't remember you making that specific parallel, in regard to the new creation, the Christ, the first fruits, and the second Adam, and therefore the new creation. But that's what came to my mind, that Paul in both chapters is talking about fruit and first fruits. One obviously is harvest, but the other is the new creation.
Mm-hmm.
But they're parallel thoughts in many, many ways. And Paul's imagery there of the new creation of the gospel bringing forth fruit as it was preached to every creature under heaven, etc. I'm trying to remember which scholar it was who took note of the fact and several scholars have, that Paul is dealing with the new creation here in Colossians. And that correlates beautifully with Christ being the second Adam and the first fruits of this new or second Adam creation.
Yes, uh, 1 Corinthians 15 is definitely using, Paul is definitely using the creation in Genesis 1 and 2 in 1 Corinthians 15. He directly quotes, even with the types of bodies, the kinds, etc. He's dealing with it there. He deals with it in speaking of the first fruit and the seed. And and the issue of resurrection itself is a concept of creation.
Oh, yeah.
It's new creation. So all of that is there. And I did point that, make a reference to the creation in the charts on Colossians 1. And, because I pointed to the first fruits in terms of James 1:18.
Yeah, there it is.
On the text, but I didn't point it out in the first verse. But that's an excellent observation. And so we'll just have to incorporate that into the chart as well. But that's very good. And so the next thing that I pointed out, in addition to the gospel, point number 2 was that Christ died for sins. And you have that in verse 3, according to the scriptures, and in Colossians 1, verse 14, and also 21. You have Christ dying for sin, reconciling them back to God who had been alienated from him. So there's the second correlation, or at least, I'm calling it the second because that's the way I listed it, but you definitely have that as well. And then the reference for the delivering up of the kingdom. In Colossians, it tells us clearly what they were being delivered from, and that was from darkness. This is a resurrection concept. And, I've always said when people are talking about the body in 1 Corinthians 15, they never seem to put any emphasis on the kingdom. And you and I have for years talked about the kingdom being resurrection,
Yep.
And but see, if you talk about the kingdom, you have to talk about that which does not come with observation. You have to talk about that which is covenantal in nature. You have to, you can't be talking about a physical body when you're seeing the kingdom as the resurrection body. But that's what's happening here, and it's a delivering up out of the realm of darkness, which is the realm below or beneath, and then into the kingdom of God and into the kingdom of light. And that's the same delivering up of 1 Corinthians 15. Most people think that it's a giving up, but it's really a delivering them out of death, out of the realm of the old kingdom, which was the ministration of death, into the kingdom of God, and therefore into the presence of God. So that's how I would see the delivering up, because as you've pointed out years ago, that the term paradidomi does not mean to abdicate,
Right.
to give up, because Christ in Revelation 22 is still seen with the Father in the kingdom on the throne. The next observation was the image of the heavenly, which we see in verses 48 and 49, which would be immortality. And then you have the same thing in Colossians 1 and verse 15 when it says he is the image of the invisible God. Well, who has immortality? That's God. So there's your immortality. There's the correlation between those two. But even beyond that, I've also added Colossians 3:9 and 10, which is the putting off of the body which was corrupt after the deceitful lust, and then putting on the new man, as Ephesians says, which is created in the image of him, according to true holiness and righteousness, or righteousness and true holiness. And so there you have the correlations of the body, that immortal body, and the image of the heavenly that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 15. So, and I don't think that's, that was random. I think he's doing this and definitely showing the correlations between these two chapters. I mean, it's just too many of those correlations for this to just be, a casual thing, or to think that there is no design and purpose within what's happening in 1 Corinthians, in Colossians 1. by way of comparison. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that concept about the image. And you and I have talked about this on many, many occasions, in which Paul says, as we have, aorist tense, born, past tense, aorist tense, the image of the earthly, let us put on the image of the heavenly.
Hmm.
And that's in the subjunctive. So here is Paul discussing something that was taking place at the time, and that he was urging them to participate in. And I think it was it Weist, or no, it was Vincent, word studies. And there's some other commentators as well. I'm sorry, it was Linsky, who said we cannot allow the subjunctive here, even though the majority of manuscript evidence is in favor of it.
Hmm.
But he said we can't allow that, because if we allow that, then that means that we have a part to play in our resurrection and in the body of our resurrection. And of course, those of us who've been in the preterist movement for a long time, we're going, so what's the problem there? But Linsky, as with most futurists and those who believe that Paul is dealing with individual physical bodies, they have a real problem with that.
Hmm.
Instead of seeing that Paul is talking in a corporate sense here about the body and them collectively comprising the nature of that body. And as he expresses in 1 Corinthians 3, as he expresses in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, you, second person plural, that is, you, the body of Christ, are the temple of God. Collectively, are the temple of God.
Correct.
And so I see that very much at play here. Pardon me. When Paul is talking about this image, and as a matter of fact, I think it was at the Memphis lectureship in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. I had some things to say about how important this whole concept of being transformed into the image of God's dear Son
Hmm.
is. I mean, that is so incredibly eschatological, but it gets into the question, and this reflects on what you were saying a few moments ago. We have been trained to think, well, the natural is the physical, the spiritual is non-physical. Well, we're trained to think also, okay, the body, that's this, that's physical body. So that's the natural man. So this physical body has to be transformed into a spiritual, non-corporeal body. And Paul, when he talks about the image of Christ, is not talking about that at all.
No,
Matter of
he's
fact,
not.
I love 2 Peter chapter 1, when Peter, who a lot of people say, well, he doesn't discuss image and he doesn't discuss body like Paul does. Well, he gives us a lot of hints in a lot of different texts that he has exactly the same identical concept of body and spirit and transformation and image that Paul did. But he says that they were in the process right then of putting on the image of God, or they were becoming partakers of the divine nature. Well, how were they doing that? Well, first of all, being participants of the divine nature is being changed into the image of God. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So Peter is telling them that they were being transformed. They were becoming partakers of the divine nature through knowledge. William, I'm pretty sure that just knowing more about God doesn't change my physiology.
That's correct. I had that same conversation with some guy today. We were going back and forth, and that was one of the things that I pointed out, was that there's no physiological change in this transition, this transformation that was taking place. This is Second Corinthians 3 as
Oh, yeah.
well. And that was already in progress. and yet there was no physiological change in that. And the word pneumatikos, for example,
Yeah.
is used in 1 Corinthians 3, but it's there
True.
compared with sarx. Um, and it's used in 1 Corinthians 14. It's used in Galatians 6:1, all referring to individuals who were considered spiritual or who considered themselves as such. And of course, it's in a negative sense in 1 Corinthians 3:2, where, Paul says because of their conduct, they were not considered that. But positionally, they had entered into that state of being spiritual and had done so without having to put off a physical body, without having to go through physical death in order to be that. Now, how many pneumaticos bodies do we have? And so it's important to recognize that. And so it wasn't a contrast between them not having a fleshly body and being transformed into something non-fleshly. And that's what's so important about looking at this from that perspective. But that transformation is into the image of God. It's just not consummated, and it would be consummated at the parousia, but the process was already going on, which means that they had already start putting off the other body, as you mentioned from 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 49. Fee, it's interesting to study Fee. I mean, to study all of them for that matter, who comment on that, but particularly looking at Fee and looking at N.T. Wright, deal with those concepts, acknowledge what they mean, and then still resort back to something that they don't mean.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I sitting here thinking, I couldn't help but reflect on Romans chapter 8. I remember as a very young Bible student, I couldn't tell you which commentary it was. I couldn't tell you which book it was. But commenting on Romans chapter 8, they said Paul seems to be a proto-Gnostic because Paul says those who are in the flesh cannot be pleasing to God. Well, folks, this is all within the matrix of being transformed into the image of God and putting off the old man, putting off the flesh. And yet Paul says, if you're in the flesh, you cannot be pleasing to God. Well, if we're going to think purely in physiological terms, then we might as well give up because we cannot be pleasing to God. And then Paul goes ahead to say, you are not in the flesh,
Mm-hmm.
but you're in the spirit. And if, boy, it's a big word, if the Spirit of Christ dwells in you, the body is dead. Well, wait a minute. I always thought the biological body was dead because of sin. And yet Paul says, if Christ is in you, the body is dead, which means if Christ is not in you, the body is alive.
Correct.
Wow. That doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. And again, all of this falls under this umbrella of Christ, the first fruit of the new creation. What kind of a new creation is it? It is a creation, it is a body transformed into the image of God through the knowledge of Christ.
And when you're reading it in Colossians, you do not get a single impression that he's talking about a physical body.
Oh, no. Oh,
It's
no.
it's clearly dealing with spiritual concepts in that chapter, as opposed to something physical.
Yeah, and
Um,
that gets to the image, if I may use a pun here, to
mhm,
the image of putting off the old man and putting on the new.
right.
And the new is made in the image of the one who created him. Well, there's garden imagery again that started in chapter 1.
Chapter 1.
Yeah. So anyway, I didn't want to get too far afield there, but those are these are such important concepts and motifs that are interwoven into everything that Paul writes. And it's so important for us to begin to look a little bit deeper than, oh, well, Paul mentions body and he mentions flesh and he mentions the image of Christ. Well, what did Christ look like? Oh, he's 5'5" Jewish man. No, we're not being transformed into a 5'5" Jewish man. We're
Yep.
being being transformed into the spiritual image of Christ, to love that which is good, to hate that which is evil, on and on.
And some people argue that Paul is infusing both Hellenistic and Hebraic concepts together. That's nothing but Platonism
Yeah.
that they're in. I think Paul was well aware of Platonistic views, and that what he argues in 1 Corinthians 15 and Colossians is totally destructive to Platonism. See, Plato had this escapist concept, as you say. They're looking at the body as evil, and it's something you have to escape from, and that's what most eschatology is about. It's about escaping from the physical body, as opposed to these concepts that are mentioned here in terms of a spiritual transformation, and from a salvific point of view, and that's so very, very important to understand. All right, the next point, we've hinted at, and that is the first fruits, and that's the one that really got things, got the cobwebs spinning when I hit that on the first fruits, and I said, okay, well, what was he the first fruits of? What does first fruit, indicate? It's the beginning of the harvest. It means that the harvest is already underway, that it's imminent, etc. And first fruits is just the, what we would look at from the plant realm, the botanical realm. But firstborn would be from, humans, animals, etc., that which comes out of the womb. But they both mean the same thing in essence. You even have in Hebrews 12 and verse 23, when he talks about the church of the firstborn ones, and that's parallel to the first fruits. And Hebrews 12 and Revelation 14, but right here in 1 Corinthians 15. So there's a correlation there. And when it says that he's the first fruits, as you were saying before, that's the first fruits of the new creation. And the new creation is the body of Christ. So when you debated, what was his name in Alabama?
David?
No, not David, not that one. The one prior to that, years ago. Tummy, was it Tummy? Anyway, I can't think of his name, but you remember, we were in Huntsville, I think.
Oh. Good grief. Boy, that's been a long, long time ago.
But yeah, one of his arguments was that Christ was the first fruit from the dead, and you pointed
Thomas
out,
Thrasher. Thomas Thrasher.
Thomas Thrasher, that's who it is. And but that he was not the first fruits from physical death.
That was, yeah, I remember
that was
that
a very telling moment.
That was a really telling moment. He just hammered it. He had his chart up there. First fruit means first, Preston. It means absolutely first. What do you think it means, Preston? And I got up there. Well, okay, let's look to see what it means. And when I asked him for his chart, he didn't want to give it.
Yeah.
He said, "What do you want to use it? What do you want it for?" And I said, "I want to use it. I want to show it to people." And he wouldn't give it to me. But anyway, that backfired on him pretty well.
Yeah. So there's the first fruits of the new creation. And then what do you have in Colossians? He talks about Christ being the firstborn of the new creation, which is the church, the body of Christ. And therefore you have that harvest pledge. Let me see if I have it on this one or on the next one. Yeah, we'll just go to the next one where we talk about the body. And this brings in another concept, because in Colossians, he talks about being the head of the body, which is the church, the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. So there's that beginning, there's that new creation. But when he talks about the body, he's bringing in temple concept as well. Okay. Because 1 Timothy 3:15, if I am long delayed, that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God. Well, that's temple.
Yep.
Isaiah 2:2, that's the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. That's temple language. So what's happening here is, he's the head of the body. And when you understand body and temple, we're dealing with a non-physical concept once again. Christ being the high priest, which coincides with everything we've said about his offering up his body for sin. So that's what you're dealing with, and that goes right into his being a priest after the order of Melchizedek. So all of that is, incorporated into this concept of body. And I think it's Mike Sullivan some time ago who even pointed out that looking at the imagery of Daniel 2 for the head and the breast and the arms and the belly, etc., that it was, a body, but that was a temple concept. And so he's related that. But even in scripture, I mean, the Bible tells you over and over again that the body is the temple. And you quoted it earlier from 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 19 and 20. So there you have the body and the temple as the same. And Paul said it in 1 Corinthians 3. He's making that correlation. You're God's building, you're God's field, and then you are the temple, etc. So body and temple are just one and the same thing. It's the house of God. And that brings in the concept of the priesthood, because Christ would be the priest after the order of Melchizedek. He's the high priest from that perspective, and therefore the head of the body from that concept. Anyway, did you have any comments on that, or did you want to?
Well, I was sitting here thinking if we could turn back just for a moment here.
Okay.
This is not a monkey wrench by any stretch of the imagination, because everything that you said, I think, is absolutely true. But there is one
And I'm going to
thing.
see if I can anticipate what you're going to say here, but go ahead. I'm not
Okay.
going to say it. I'm just going to listen.
Well, I was thinking about Colossians chapter 1, verse 15. He is the firstborn of all creation.
Mhm.
And then it tells us why. Well, the Arians, way back when, 4th century, 3rd, 4th century, said, well, this passage teaches that Jesus was the first one created, was the first creation of God. That's not what the text says, though.
Right.
The word firstborn there is from the Greek word prototokos.
Mhm.
It's a slightly different word from protos,
Yes.
but it tells us why Christ was the firstborn of all creation. He was the firstborn of all creation because, and that's what the very next verse starts with, hoti, Greek word hoti, which means because by him were all things created. So I'm sitting here wondering exactly how that correlates to the first fruits. I understand that Christ is the first fruits, and he is the one that creates the harvest. He creates the new creation. So in that may be that correlation and connection with prototokos of Christ being, as some translations render it, he is the preeminent of all creation
Mhm.
because he created all things.
Yes.
It's not an assertion by any stretch of the imagination that Christ was a created being. That's a misunderstanding of the text. That's the only thing that I was sitting here going, okay, what's the direct correlation there?
Well, I figured that was going to be the direction that you went, because I remember, when I had the debate with William Vincent, I pointed out the difference between the two terms
Yeah.
in that text. But let's see if I have this thought together. Even when you look at it from that perspective, and verse 18 does have the other term in it anyway, so you
Yeah.
have it there. What was I going to say? I had it at the tip of my tongue moment, and then I was listening to you talk, and I've kind of slipped at this point. I might think of it in a moment.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say was that all creation uh, stemmed from the temple anyway. All of God's acts were like from the temple. And so from that perspective, he would still have the preeminence and be the first cause of creation from that perspective. So that's all I
Okay.
was going to say along with
Yeah,
that.
that's kind of what I was saying. As the first fruits of the new creation, he likewise created all things.
Hmm.
That's what I was driving at.
Okay.
Okay.
All
Yeah,
right.
I had to dig into Colossians chapter 1:15 and following, because I was having some really extended, in-depth discussions with some Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
And they actually brought the passage up, oh, look, this specifically
Oh
says,
yeah, they're definitely bringing.
yeah, this is the firstborn of all creation. And I looked at it the very first, and it was the very first time I'd ever been confronted with it. And I said, no, 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 that's not what that is saying. And just the logic of it hit me immediately. And I said, wait a minute, how could Christ be first if he had already created everything else? I said, you got to be last in order to,
Yeah.
in what you're saying, because that's convoluted. You got to deal with the fact that Colossians gives the reason why Christ is called the first, and the reason why he is called the prototokos, and the same words used in Revelation chapter 3, verse 14.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why he's being called the first fruit is because he created all things. All things followed him because he created all things. But he wasn't created first because he had already created all things.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
The logic just doesn't work. And when I explained that to those Jehovah's Witnesses representatives, they dropped that like a hot potato. They never came back to that at all. So anyway, okay, proceed.
All right. So, we've already commented pretty much on this head of the body and that correlating with the house of God and applying to this order of Melchizedek that you see in 1 Corinthians 15. He must reign till he has put all enemies under his feet. And that's citing Psalm 110, etc. And so you have that same idea involved in his being the head of the church or the house of God as far as being the priest. And Hebrews 3:6 even refers to that in terms of Christ being a son over his own house. All enemies, the principalities, powers, and death being put under his feet. Again, verse 25, verse 26 goes back to Psalm 8, 6 through 8, and that's back to Genesis 1 as well, and Psalm 110, 1, and in Colossians 1:16 and also 2:15, you have that idea expressed, and the same thing in Ephesians 6:12 and other passages that deal with destroying the powers, principalities, etc. So,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. I've often looked at Colossians 2:15. And I have correlated it with 1 Corinthians 15, by the way. So this is one of those parallels that I have actually seen and utilized in the past. But it seems to me, William, that an awful lot of people, and this gets back to people's preconceived ideas about body and about flesh and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And it strikes at the heart of what people think when they say, well, Christ was going to destroy all the evil. Christ was going to do this and he's going to do that. But in Colossians and 1 Corinthians 15, he has put all things under his feet. And the Greek is very powerful. It's very emphatic. And here in Colossians chapter 2 and verse 15, Paul says, he, that is Christ, having, this is old aorist tense, spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it, that is, in the cross. Now, William, I look at this as an incredible paradox. If you were an observer in the first century and you saw Jesus hanging on the cross, would anybody think that he triumphed over the principalities and powers by
No,
the
just
cross?
like the Jews did. They thought that they
We
had
won.
conquered everything. They thought they had won.
Yeah. And so it's a classic example, I think, and it seems to me, of having to look at spiritual realities, not physically visible realities. How did Christ triumph over the principalities and the powers through the cross? Well, it was through his resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
It's because the cross couldn't hold him, so to speak. And so to move on from that, when Paul says that Christ, he has, aorist tense, put all things under his feet. In my very first debate
with Bill Lockwood,
he says, well, Preston says, Christ has already come. Well, that means Christ has already put everything under his feet. But he said, I look around and I see murders, thievery, rapes, homosexuality. I just see all of this evil, all of this sin. So tell me, Preston, how has Christ already done that? And I appealed to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He has. So, William, share with us just a couple of thoughts how Paul could say he has put all things under his feet, and then turn right around and say, when all things shall be put under his feet. And then Paul could say in Colossians chapter 2, verse 15, that he put them all, principalities and powers, he shamed them. He triumphed over them in that.
Yeah, well, it's the already but not yet, obviously. Hebrews 2 and verse 8, I think it is, speaks of that very clearly and will make the statement. It will say that he has put all things under his feet, and then turn right around and say, but we see not yet all things put under him. So that's another already but not yet statement. But the things that had been put under him were not things that were in the flesh. He's talking about those principalities, those powers, and the rulers of the darkness of the age, etc., that had been defeated signally through his crucifixion. But the outworking of that would not take place until, of course, the time of the parousia.
So the question would be, if he had already put all things under his feet, if he already had triumphed over them, the empirical reality is that as you looked at the principalities and powers, they were still in place.
Mm-hmm.
But the spiritual reality is that Christ had already conquered them.
Yes.
Okay. So the following question would be, if he had already conquered them, already triumphed over them, is Paul expressing the idea that the time was going to come, which the futurists affirm, that he would actually abolish those realities?
No. They would not be abolished in the sense, for example, as you were talking about those principalities being put down. If Christ had already conquered them, and here they are in terms of continuing to exist because they were fighting against them from that point, it would mean, because basically what it's describing is sin. Now there's a sense that I would say from a covenantal perspective that yes, they would have been put down. But in terms of individual participation in them, I don't think that's what he meant from that perspective. Maybe I'm kind of missing it, but I'm trying to recall how you communicated that at one point in terms of the putting down of these principalities.
Well, to me, part of the key is found in the words that Paul uses. He has put all things under his feet. He uses the Greek word hupotazo. Well, hupotazo doesn't mean annihilate.
That's true.
But it means to subject, to conquer, to put under. Okay, so he had put all things under his feet. Well, that doesn't mean he had obliterated it. But what may seem like, and I don't have much time here, what may seem like an unrelated issue, but it's really not. What Christ did, and I've got to go back linguistically here for just a moment. The last enemy to be destroyed, and Paul uses these two words, what it seems to me like, interchangeably, hupotazo and katargeo. The last enemy to be destroyed. He has put all things under him, hupotazo. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. He was going to do to death what he had already done to all things. and it's a consummative event. So if he had not abolished, taken out of existence all things that were evil, then he wasn't going to destroy death, except this gets into what you were suggesting there a moment ago. In Christ, there is no more death because the blood of Christ cleanses us from all unrighteousness. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, the blood of Christ cleanses us and forgives us. So there's a word that I like to use, William, and I've got to hurry here. I was thinking about this earlier in the day, and I hadn't even at the time been able to look at your outline. But there's a word, and I shared this with a local minister a couple of years ago. And when I shared it with him that day, it literally transformed his understanding of biblical eschatology. He was raised and had been teaching that at the eschaton, at the parousia of Christ, all sin, all death, all human frailty is obliterated, taken out of existence. And yet I shared with him the picture of the new heaven and the new earth, the new Jerusalem. Outside of the new Jerusalem, there were still dogs, liars, and those who worked abominable things.
Mm-hmm.
And what I shared with him, and it's found in one key word, and that is sanctuary. What I see the new Jerusalem as being, and that is a sanctuary from all of the evil that is in the world. Doesn't mean that sin and death doesn't exist outside of the city. Inside the city, we are not subject to sin and death. If sin and death does not exist outside of the New Jerusalem, then that's universalism.
Exactly.
But sin and death obviously exists outside of the city. Inside the city, which is what Revelation 21:4 and following is describing, inside the city, which is just another way of saying in Christ, there is no more the sin, there is no more the death, there is no more the curse. That means that the New Jerusalem is the sanctuary to which people can come into which they are invited. That's Revelation 21. The nations of the earth come into the city to find healing. That's sanctuary. And so, pardon me, this to me is such a beautiful, wonderful concept. And it explains so many nuances that people struggle with. Well, why do I still see sin and death? Well, because God never promised to destroy sin and death outside of Christ. Christ is our sanctuary. He is our hope of glory. He is our life. He is our salvation. And without him, there is no life, there is no light, there is no salvation. And so to me, that one word is so incredibly, incredibly important.
Yeah, it's like you don't have to, as you said earlier, annihilate a thing in order to render it powerless. If you're fighting a war and one side has a more powerful weapon than you do, and they use that weapon to wipe out all of your weapons, then what are you doing? You're just walking around with a bow and arrow fighting against the nuclear bomb. It is not, it's not going to work. So that's the idea. You render them powerless
well,
and
again, I just think the word study there in 1 Corinthians 15 to understand what Paul meant when he says to put under, he has put all things under him. And he's looking for the completion of that, which he calls the katargeo. Now, katargeo has a few nuances to it. It can mean to take out of, to cease to function, but it also means to nullify, to break the power of.
Right.
And so you have to allow the context to determine that. Well, okay, listen, folks, we are out of time. I suspect that we need to get back into this next week because I want to hear more from William about his outline, because this is really really good stuff. And it, as you can tell, it causes my juices to start flowing. And so I want to say, well, what about this and what about that for clarification's sake? So anyway, so folks, William, thank you for your insights on this. Look forward to hearing more about that. And folks, thank you for joining us here on Two Guys at a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. With that, I'll say good night and God bless.
Good night.
Yeah, that's some good stuff, William. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, look, consider this. You know, I said I would interpret 1 Corinthians 15 upside down,
Yeah.
right? So if you start out with the sting of death is sin and the strength of sin is the law, well, that's covenant.
Yep.
So what's the opposite of that? What cancels that out? It's grace and truth. You know, God gives the victory through Christ. All right. And then you start lining up everything in relation to covenant. So that means mortality has to be old covenant. Corruption has to be old covenant. All of that has to be covenant from that perspective. And then you have the idea of moving from the glory to the more glorious. You know, the law was spiritual, holy, and just, but the new covenant is so much more that it makes the law as though it's nothing. And that's the beauty of that situation. So
Yeah,
I've
that's
been
good.
having a ball with that.
I can see where you have, and that just that's some good rich stuff. It really,
Yeah.
really is. All right. I enjoyed that. All right, man.
Okay.
Good night.
All right. Good night.